Our presentation today is from Dr. Heather Norman Bergdorf and Jeannie Major. They are going to be talking to us about using your stocked pantry. And this is a follow-up to the session that was a couple of weeks ago on stocking your pantry. So I think that we're all going to learn some new and interesting things today. So Heather, I think I'll turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Mindy. And thank you to everyone who's joining us again as we continue our conversation about stocking our pantries. So except this time, we're really going to build on our past topic on how to, we talked about how to stock. And today we're going to talk about how to actually use what we have. So even if you missed our part one of this webinar series, that's totally fine. I really do feel like you're going to, find a little bit a nugget of information or have a takeaway today that you can apply even if you missed that first part. And so as we continue our conversation about our stocked pantry, I just want to reiterate that we're considering our freezer to be part of our pantry just because we're talking about those items that tend to have a longer shelf life. So not only is that our freezer, but also those canned and dried items as well. And then you may have a large pantry. You may just have one cabinet or cupboard. It could be a full closet, but regardless, we really want to give you some takeaways today that are conscientious of pantry size, budget, versatility, and how to actually use all of those things that maybe you ran out and kind of stocked up just because of the current public health situation. Now we want to put it to good use. And so today I'm joined by Jeannie Major. She's a project coordinator over at the Nutrition Education Program. So this is a great little collaboration within Family and Consumer Sciences. So again, hopefully there is some information today that you can take away and actually put into practice. And we will both be kind of jumping back and forth and having this conversation as we go through our slides today. And so essentially, before we get started and dive into the new stuff, I really want to recap this pantry process that we unveiled during our last training. Really making the most of the storage in your pantry can be done by following these 5 steps. And so we really want to encourage you, first and foremost, to take inventory. So go through your pantry and see what you have. It's a great opportunity to check those expiration dates. And so we'll actually touch on that towards the end of our talk today because that was brought up in the first webinar, that was some information that you all were needing. And then, evaluate what items do you really enjoy, what items do you not enjoy so much, and that's okay, right? So you might see that black beans is on every pantry staples list that you read online. Well, if you don't like them, you don't have to buy them. That's fine. Maybe you have something that's been sitting on this shelf for a while, so maybe we don't go back and restock that. And so once you've done those steps, then you want to stock. You actually want to consider stocking your pantry with the items that you're going to use, and maybe that fits on your family's staple list because every family's pantry staple list is going to look different. So just keep that in mind. We also encouraged you on our last training to go and organize your pantry in a way that makes sense for you. Maybe you've just been, after you go to the grocery store or after you run to the supermarket, wherever you purchase your food, you just bring it home and you put it on shelves. Well, we encourage you to go back and organize your pantry in a way that you will use it. Maybe it is by food group. Maybe it is grouping like items together, so all the grains go together. Or maybe it's organizing your pantry staples into meals so that you can quickly and easily see that, oh, I have everything that I need and I could make spaghetti tonight. So whatever worked for you as far as organizing or reorganizing. And then this is a process. We're going to restock, right? So once we've gone through all of this, after you organize, maybe you realize I'm kind of low on some canned vegetables, and those are super helpful to have on hand. So that's the opportunity for you to go back, take advantage of what's on sale, and ultimately restock your pantry so that you're ready to go again. So that's what we discussed last time, and we really want to build off that. So you have that stocked pantry. So what can we do? So before we dive into our new content, I want to throw out a poll question. So if you're on Facebook, live, go ahead and put this in the chat, or if you're in Zoom, you can also put this in the chat box as well. But based on our past conversation, have you had the opportunity to restock or reorganize your pantry? So let us know. Yes, no, if you haven't got to it, that's totally fine. If you have, we'd love to know maybe what was a change or what was something that you stocked up on. So I'll give you a second to put some of your thoughts into the chat and comment box. Are we seeing anything?
Yes, lots of things like
Perfect.
stock up on canned vegetables. Yes, I group mine. Pasta, rice, canned vegetables, stocked up on dried beans and old-fashioned oats.
Oh, awesome.
Restocking at the end of the week as I use it.
That's great to kind of keep a running list of what you're using. That's something that we tend to do. Canned vegetables, kind of having all your canned goods in one area in the pantry. I think one of the wonderful things about canned vegetables is that they require so little prep, right? So it's a barrier to prep those veggies and try to get those into meals. But canned options kind of take away the hard work that it takes to prep your vegetables when you want to use them. And we're actually going to talk about dried beans a little later. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Mindy, as well.
So we had someone that said they had pitched some expired stuff. And
oh, perfect.
Yeah, so I think that's a good one too. My pantry stays pretty organized, but I group things by type already and keep a running list on my fridge, so that's good. I like to keep my pantry organized one way, and then my husband will come and reorganize it for me, and I can't find anything.
That is a real life barrier. I completely understand. Well, thank you all for sharing that. And if you haven't restocked or reorganized, that's totally fine. Hopefully that's something that you can work towards in the next couple weeks or so. All right, so to move into our new content, I'm going to hand it over to Jeannie.
Hi, everyone. Good to see some of your faces and names again. Okay, so Heather and I met last week to start working on this presentation, and we came up with this plan for no recipe meals. Hopefully you find it useful, but we started just thinking through how we actually put meals together, and we wanted to share our process with you. And I'm going to go through this, and then my next slide, I'm going to apply it to an example. So hopefully it will all come together and make sense for you. So the first thing you want to do is start with a base. What do you have on hand? So this can be a pantry base, like pasta or rice or beans. It's kind of that one thing that's going to be the definite in your meal, like, or maybe if it's not a pantry item, maybe it's some leftover chicken that you have to use by tomorrow. So that one thing that's going to, be the basis for the rest of the ingredients that you put together that you're going to turn into something delicious. So then these next steps just kind of help you choose which other ingredients you're going to use to make this meal. So the next thing you want to do is pick a form. Are you going to make a soup, a casserole, a bowl, like a burrito bowl or something, a taco, a sandwich? When you sit down to actually enjoy that meal, what is it going to look like? Maybe you have some leftover tortilla wraps or, just tortilla wraps in general. So you're going to do tacos or burritos or enchiladas or something. But picking your form will give you more direction as to how to pick the other ingredients. So then last time we talked a little bit about making my plate meals out of your pantry items. So this third step, we said to balance it out. Add a different food group or a color using the My Plate. So we eat with our eyes. I think a lot of us know that. And if everything is beige on the plate or everything's one color, maybe it's not as exciting or enticing for us to consume. So brighten it up with some bell peppers or whatever it might be. Maybe it's, some fruit to a salad or something like that. But pick a different food group or color or even texture to balance it out. And then plan it out. As I was thinking through this, I realized plan it out and picking a form are somewhat similar, but plan out what you have time for, what prep is required. If you only have 25 minutes, a soup or a slow cooker meal is probably not going to be your best bet. But if you want easy cleanup or something, maybe you do everything in a skillet, and that's the plan for the meal. So have a plan. And then the fifth step is easier than it sounds, and we're going to talk more about this later in the presentation. But season it up. Be creative with what you have. And this is where taking inventory comes back into place. And I know in the last presentation we talked about adding those flavor enhancers to your pantry list. So that's where those really come into play. And you can also look at all your condiments and looking at your refrigerator door, or in your refrigerator, your spice cabinet, what vinegars do you have? This is where you'll really come up with things that you wouldn't, if you look around, you'll think to use it, where otherwise you might forget that you have it. So you can really be creative with cooking. Baking is more of a science, but cooking, you can put your own spin on it. So don't let not having a recipe intimidate you. And you can always reference recipes that you've enjoyed in the past too, to kind of inspire you as to what you should put together. And if you have questions throughout, just feel free to ask.
Absolutely.
Do you want to add anything?
Well, I was just going to say, when we pick a form, like a soup or casserole, a bowl, taco, or pizza, that's what I was even thinking of. We're actually having homemade pizzas tonight for dinner. And last night, I literally just looked through and said, what do I need to use up? So we're going to have some strange toppings, and that's okay, right? That's just what I have on hand, and we're going to use because we're making fewer trips to the grocery store. But a lot of those can be based on other recipes we may already know or have. So it's kind of a game of substitution, right? So if you don't have all of the things to fill in a specific recipe that you might have, you can use it as a basis. And like you said, it doesn't have to be exact. It's a time to experiment a little bit and have fun and just play around with the flavors and textures, because it's not baking. We know baking is very precise, but cooking is more flexible. So I think that kind of helps alleviate some of the stress that people may have when they see, oh, I don't have a recipe, and that's okay. It takes time, it takes practice. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but it does get easier. So I think that's some good points.
Okay, so then we're going to apply what we just learned. So Heather and I just did this in action as we were making the PowerPoint last week. And I had some leftover brown rice in my refrigerator, so that was going to be my base. And then let's pick a form. Don't have a ton of time, and I don't really feel like cleaning up a bunch of dishes. So a stir fry is a good pick, because I can just do it all in the skillet, and it's pretty much a skillet and a spoon, that I have to clean up. And then, so balance it out with my plate. I have some frozen peas and carrots to make kind of like a fried rice, or, with my stir fry. And then we want some protein. So I'm going to scramble an egg. That's pretty popular in fried rice. And then for the plan, like I said, it's all going to be on the stovetop and just make it easy. And then season it up. And this is where taking inventory and going through your pantry and your refrigerator comes into play. So off the top of my head, I just said soy sauce and crushed red pepper. And then once I went to my spice cabinet and pantry and looked at everything, I realized I had some dried ginger that I never used. I bought it for a cookie recipe this Christmas, and I thought, oh, that will be perfect for this. Let's use that. Garlic makes everything better, so some dried garlic, and then some sesame seeds. I wouldn't have thought to use that unless I, visually saw it. So, you could also, I was thinking too, you could add some frozen pineapple or canned pineapple to do like a pineapple fried rice too. So that was our example. Heather, do you want to add anything?
No, I was going to say we actually had leftover brown rice last week as well. And so we were going to make a stir fry, and then we noticed that we were out of soy sauce. And so we just took another spin and added some different herbs and spices to make it more of a Mexican burrito bowl instead.
Oh, there you
go. So it
was
the same ingredients, but just changing the seasonings a little bit kind of made it a completely different dish. So we added in some black beans, and we went that direction. So really using some spices and herbs we had in the cabinet and some black beans out of the pantry, we were able to make a balanced meal as well. So that's a great idea.
And that's where kind of deciding on like the one or two factors that are your definites help you shape you know, or gives you more direction as to where you're going to go. If you didn't have like that, you know, you decided to go that route because you didn't have soy sauce. So,
Correct.
yeah.
Yep. So, this is something that I think a lot of you guys are going to be excited about, or at least I hope so. And I know that a lot of our extension agents have already received these materials, but maybe you need a little bit more inspiration or help when it comes to no recipe meals, because really we want to empower you and encourage you to experiment and try to build some of those cooking skills. So we have put together a list of 30 meal ideas. So you could actually consider this a menu of options, just a little pun there. Essentially, what we have listed out here are ideas for either breakfast, lunch, or dinner, where we have not necessarily provided a recipe, but we've grouped together common pantry and kitchen staples so that you have the opportunity to kind of build these meals on your own. I think one of the great things about a lot of pantry staples, when you think about whether it's canned vegetables or rice or pasta, a lot of those foods have directions on their packaging on how to prepare them. So if you can essentially follow the package directions to prepare those foods, we're basically just combining those foods together. So that's where you get a lot of the flexibility from these no meal meal ideas, no recipe meal ideas. So it's just combinations. There's no recipes, but we're suggesting ingredients that combine together. So for those who are watching on both Facebook and Zoom, we're going to have a bit.ly link, just a short URL that we're going to provide that will take you to these so that you can download. And then if you would like, feel free to reach out to your county extension agent, and they will also be able to provide these for you as well. And so you'll see that a lot of these go back to that idea of picking a form. So whether it's a burrito bowl or it's a soup or a chili or a casserole. So essentially we're just combining those into a form that we're already very familiar with. So I think stir fry is actually listed on here as well. And you could just change it up depending on what vegetables you have on hand or how you choose to add flavor. So this is a new resource that we have that we hope gives you a little bit of inspiration when it comes to developing meals without a recipe.
Okay, and Heather mentioned earlier about, Heather mentioned earlier about, you know, swapping different things. If you don't have, you know, one particular item, you can, it doesn't have to be that much of like a science. You can just swap in something else and, you know, still come out with a great flavorful meal. So a lot of these that we listed in this, on this slide came from your suggestions or your, your suggestions last week at the end of our presentation when we said, you know, what items do you need more ideas or maybe some help with using? So that's how we came up with what we decided to list in here. And when you're making a pantry swap, consider the flavor, the texture, and the appearance, and how that relates to the end result of the meal. So just think about what that ingredient does for the dish you're using and how the substitution will impact the end result. So for example, if you need a substitution for oatmeal, think about the texture and again, the flavor and the appearance. So let's say, let's do breadcrumbs. Are the breadcrumbs providing a nice crunch to the meal? Could maybe some nuts or seeds be used in place of those breadcrumbs? Or are the breadcrumbs are they being used as a binder, like in meatballs or something? Could you just sub oatmeal or something else as that substitution? So you'll see that our suggestions aren't always going to be universal, but they're just some ideas to help you think in different ways and maybe use something that you haven't used before. And then just hopefully this helps you come up with new ways as how to come up with substitutions. All right, so for the first one with meat, you can, for different substitutions, you can use lentils, beans, or mushrooms. We had questions on how to use lentils, and lentils are a great substitution for meat. You can also use different varieties of beans mixed together to have, you know, different textures and a different mouthfeel. And then mushrooms are, you know, they're not really a pantry, I guess you could use canned mushrooms, but fresh mushrooms would work as a good meat substitute. And I know those aren't necessarily a pantry staple, but still to help you think in different ways. And lentils, beans, and mushrooms can be used in place of meat for chilies or sloppy joes, pasta sauces, tacos. Again, think about that end result and what would make the most sense. Okay, then for rice, we had questions on how to use barley and farro. You could use those pretty much in place of any rice recipe or recipe where rice is called for. Really good in like savory soups. They're just, those barley and farro are kind of nutty and hearty. So both of those would go really well in soups. You could also use lentils in place of rice, or even short pastas. So if you maybe a rice was called for in a soup, you could use like an elbow macaroni or a small shell in place of the rice. And then beans, you know, there's tons of different varieties of beans. So you can also just sub one bean for another. We had questions about chickpeas. And chickpeas you can pretty much use in place of any other white bean. It doesn't, you know, you don't have to find, of course, there's plenty of good recipes like hummus and other things where chickpeas are the main ingredient or exclusively called for, but they're really versatile and you can use them in place of any other white bean. You can also use lentils or peas, give that nice bright, fresh flavor in place of beans as well. And then for pasta, I think this one definitely depends on what your end result, you know, what you want the end result to be, but you can use rice, potatoes, or even grits. If you wanted to make lasagna, obviously grits are not going to be your ideal substitution, but let's say you made meatballs, try putting those meatballs over some mashed potatoes or maybe some grits in place of pasta if you don't have pasta. Another one for granola, if you want that nice crunch with a parfait or a topping to yogurt or whatever it is, you could use cereal in place of that. And then you could also just mix different nuts, seeds, and dried fruit for that nice crunch. If you had leftover, or if you had a bunch of oatmeal that you wanted to use up and you had some extra time, you can also just make your own granola. Breadcrumbs I touched on earlier, you could use oatmeal or even crushed crackers or cereal in place of breadcrumbs. And then let's see, lemon juice, you could use any other citrus, or if the role of the lemon juice in a recipe was that it's acidic in nature, you could just use vinegar in place of that. And then tomato is our next one, and I have a whole slide on different tomato products. Heather, is there anything you want to add to this one?
No, I think that is all super helpful. And one thing I will say, and this was a question we got after the last time because chickpeas were mentioned, that in the canned good aisle, they are most likely going to be canned as garbanzo beans.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Yeah. So if someone is like, I'm not sure where chickpeas are in the grocery store, you can find them in the canned good aisle, and most even small grocery stores labeled as garbanzo beans. Okay, so poll time again. Do you have a go-to pantry swap? So if you go to if you're preparing a meal and then you notice that something is missing or you need a substitution, what is something that you tend to go to in your pantry as a substitution or swap? Let's see if we get any other creative ideas that can be shared.
While we're waiting, I don't like rice, and so I'll use orzo pasta instead.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea.
That's a perfect substitution.
Yeah, short pasta.
I swap out any kind of beans, someone said. Somebody else said orzo.
Mm-hmm. Oh, nice.
Quinoa is good for rice.
Yeah.
Pinto beans for kidney beans. Mayonnaise if I don't have eggs.
Mm-hmm.
Ground pork rinds for breading. That's keto friendly.
Oh, I wouldn't have thought of that.
Rice and pasta are interchangeable. Use lots of different beans.
Mm-hmm.
Use from garbanzo beans for whipped cream.
Oh, I've heard of that. I haven't done it though.
Yes, I have heard of that.
Well, now they're moving so fast I can't read them. Ground flaxseed for eggs. Vinegar to create buttermilk.
Mm-hmm.
Frozen cauliflower rice in place of rice. Cornflakes for breadcrumbs. Unsweetened applesauce in place of oil for baking.
Great.
Lots of great ideas.
Yeah, lots of good suggestions.
Another one that we we got on Facebook is using salad dressings as marinades, but also, to add some flavor if it's vinegar based or vinaigrette based.
I do that a lot.
Yep. So those are some great suggestions. Thank you all for sharing.
Yes. Okay, so now we're going to talk about all the different tomato products. So again, we had questions in our last presentation about how to use certain items. So we kind of just decided to devote an entire slide to all these different canned tomato products. So if you're looking at the slide and you see it goes, we're going to start with whole peeled tomatoes, and then you go down to tomato sauce. From whole peeled tomatoes down to tomato sauce, just think of the actual tomato getting smoother and more pureed as you go down that list. So, well, tomato products in some grocery stores can take up like a half an aisle. I don't know if they take up an entire aisle, but there's tons of different products out there, and this is just so you know how to use the different products in whatever you're making, so that you don't use and how you can swap them out for one another. Okay, so we'll start with our whole peeled tomatoes. And whole peeled tomatoes are nice because they can be turned into almost all other tomato products. You can dice them up for diced tomatoes. You can puree them for tomato puree. Whenever I first saw whole peeled tomatoes or started cooking and realized them, I remember thinking to myself, like, why would you have that extra step of work? That seems like a lot of, why wouldn't you just buy tomato sauce or something? Well, the appeal of whole peeled tomatoes is that because they are, in their full shape and form, they are the ripest, and think of like the best of the best tomatoes are used for that product. So you're going to have a really flavorful canned tomato compared to some of the other products. So that's the appeal of whole peeled tomatoes, is that the flavor and that it can be pretty versatile. It just might require a little bit extra work. When you're using diced tomatoes, use diced tomatoes when you want distinct chunks. So think diced tomatoes are so versatile. You can use them with just a side dish of if you're making like green beans and you want to, braise them with diced tomatoes or maybe some sauteed spinach. You can use them in chilies and sauces. Or you could even make restaurant style salsa with diced tomatoes. What else am I thinking? There was something. Oh, you could make Spanish rice with diced tomatoes. So diced tomatoes, like I said, it's when you want that defined chunk or like texture of the actual. If you want like a smooth standard tomato sauce, then diced tomatoes are not really what you want to use. But
and a lot of
again,
times too, Jeannie, you can find diced tomatoes that already have seasonings. So you want to watch out for the sodium, but fire roasted, Italian, that kind of thing.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for adding that. Yeah, and then we're going to go on to crushed tomatoes. So crushed tomatoes, tomato puree, and tomato sauce, all of those can be used interchangeably. And these, they work well in place of one another for just all of your standard tomato products uses. So if you wanted to make your own tomato sauce or use it in chili or tomato soup, or these are kind of just dependent on your personal preference. So crushed tomatoes are just tomato puree plus crushed tomatoes. So, they're not as smooth. Like I said, we get smoother as we go on. Tomato puree are smoother than crushed tomatoes, but they're a bit thicker. And then tomato sauce is the most smooth and pourable form of the tomato products. And do not confuse tomato sauce with pasta sauce. So tomato sauce doesn't have any added flavors or herbs or spices or anything. So when we get down here to stewed tomatoes and pasta sauce, all I wanted to note there was that both of those have added flavors. So if you're using them in a recipe, make sure that you adjust the other spices and seasonings because they come with added flavors. Okay, and then a note on tomato paste. A lot of you asked how to use tomato paste. And the most important thing to know when using tomato paste is that you have to apply heat to it to bring out the savory flavor. So if you're making a soup and you're sauteing your onions and your celery and carrots, you would saute those and then add the tomato paste and make sure it's touching the bottom of the pan with that heat, and wait till it turns that deep dark red color, and then that's when the savory flavor comes out and you can really get the most benefit out of using tomato paste. If you just add tomato paste straight to like a huge pot of soup with the broth and everything already in it, you're not going to get that same result as you would if you saute it. Heather, do you want to add anything to our tomato?
That is super helpful, all of that. And I will say tonight for our homemade pizzas, as I'm cleaning out the refrigerator in our pantry, is I'm using tomato sauce, and I'm going to doctor it up and try to turn it into more of a pizza sauce. So
yeah, and I think that's a fun way to get kids involved too, of let it be like, use their name to call it like Nolan's special pasta sauce. And just adding some sauteed garlic and some dried herbs can make such a difference, and it just you really get such a nice flavor when you take the time to add your own seasonings.
it really, the tomato sauce really is like a blank canvas for adding flavor to it. Okay, so the next thing we got lots of questions about were dried beans. So Jeannie, if you want to walk us through this really quick.
Okay, so dried beans, there's two separate steps in preparing them. The first step is soaking, which is on this slide, and then the second step is cooking. But before I talk about those steps, I just want to talk about the appeal of dried beans. So the flavor that comes out of taking the extra time to prepare dried beans is pretty hard to match. There's something really savory and just really something satisfying about preparing dried beans if you have the time to do so. The other thing is the amount of money that you can save. So a cup of canned beans is about 60 cents per cup, and then a cup of dried beans that you prepare on your own is only about 25 cents. So it's a huge huge money saver too, not time saver, but it's a big money saver. Okay, so there's two different methods of soaking. You can do a quick soak or an overnight soak. Before you do either of these, you want to rinse the beans and take out any foreign matter and any shriveled up beans. So sometimes there's like little rocks or something in there and you just want to discard those. Rinse them off. And then for both the quick soak and the overnight soak, you use 10 cups of water per 1 pound of beans. And a pound of beans is 2 cups. So with our quick soak method, you're going to take that 10 cups to 2 cups and put it in a large stock pot. And you want to heat until it's boiling. You only boil for 2 to 3 minutes, and then you take it off the stovetop and cover and soak for at least an hour, and then you drain and rinse. So the quick soak still takes, over an hour, but it's much more quick than the overnight soak. The overnight soak is as easy as it gets though. You pretty much just fill up a large container with the beans and the water. You just cover it and refrigerate 8 hours or overnight, and then you drain and rinse. So there's not much like skill, or it's not very complicated. It's just a matter of taking the time. But if you do it overnight and then you prepare them, they're just ready to go. And some of the benefits, you can freeze them and stuff like that. But some of the benefits to soaking the beans are that they cook faster if you soak them, and then you digest them more easily. You won't have as much digestive discomfort as you might if you didn't soak them. So some of the benefits there.
Perfect. Well, and I think too, you want to be sure to check the package instructions, because some might not necessarily need this soaking process.
Yeah, like some lentils and black-eyed peas, I believe, don't need the soaking process. So when in doubt, just always check the back of the label.
Perfect.
Okay, and then the step 2 is the cooking process. And here all you do you just place the beans in a large pot, and you're going to cover it with the fresh water, because after the soaking step, you drained and rinsed them. And then once you bring it to a boil, you're going to reduce the heat, and you're going to cover the pot and simmer gently until the beans are tender but firm. So you could take a fork and smash one with it and make sure that it, breaks in that way that's not where it doesn't just crumble or crush, but it still has some texture. And this usually takes about 45 minutes to 2 hours. You can also do this in a crock pot on low for 3 to 6 hours, or you could do it in an Instapot for 25 minutes to 35 minutes on high pressure. And then in terms of flavoring them, you can add your herbs and spices at any time in the process. And then you want to wait to add salt when the beans are tender. And then you don't want to add the lemon juice or anything acidic until after the beans are cooked.
Perfect. Okay, so now I hope that we all feel a little bit more confident preparing dried beans.
Yeah, just knowing the process is helpful before you commit yourself to it. And then rice is another one that we got questions on how to use them. I've noticed with some ingredients that are almost like too much of a blank canvas, we have a hard time figuring out how to use them because there's so many different possibilities that, you know, it's almost easier to use something where that has limited options. So we're going to give you hopefully some different ideas for rice. If you have other ideas, feel free to type them in the chat box. But the first one I wanted to mention was just simply flavoring rice, using it as a side dish or as, you know, as part of a meal with some extra flavor. I mentioned you could make Spanish rice in a slide earlier, or if you were making burrito bowls, all you have, and you wanted the same rice, the like cilantro lime rice that some different restaurants have, all you have to do is add lime juice and cilantro. There's like nothing more to it. I think a little bit of salt, but, or, you know, you can just add garlic to rice or whatever herbs you have, chop them up really finely and throw them into rice. And it just makes the rice a little bit more interesting and not as ordinary if you just flavor rice on its own. Of course, you can always use rice in stir fries and with salads. If you wanted to add a little bit more bulk and make it more filling, you can just add rice to a salad. Soups, if you didn't have noodles for chicken noodle soup, you can make chicken rice soup. Slow cooker meals are really nice with rice because you don't have to prepare the rice separately from the rest of the food. You can just throw it all in the slow cooker and make a, you know, like a one pot meal. So that's a great alternative if you don't want to make a big mess. Of course, it works well in casseroles, burritos or burrito bowls, and then as stuffings for other items. So like stuffed peppers or cabbage rolls are another great option. All right, and then this last slide that I'm going to talk about is called Savor the Flavor, and this just touches on the last step of our no recipe cooking method, because as I mentioned earlier, adding flavor can sound, or it sounds easier than it actually is. So these are just some things to consider when you're adding flavor. Okay, so the first one is to consider the cooking method that you're using. Think about how different, it's not all about the actual ingredients or using herbs and spices to bring out flavor. Think about how different steamed broccoli tastes from roasted broccoli, or if you roast corn with some bell peppers, how different that flavor is going to be than if you just put frozen corn in the microwave and steam it. So consider the cooking method to bring out different flavor profiles of even the same ingredients. It can definitely you can make meals more interesting with different cooking methods. And I think this really it is definitely apparent with like stew meat when you're, that you want to cook that on low and slow and bring out that nice flavor of the stew meat as opposed to just like grilling it or cooking it on the stovetop. So cooking method definitely matters. And then take inventory of your kitchen. You probably have more than you realize. Looking around your kitchen, as I mentioned earlier, to think of all the different possibilities of what you can use is definitely worthwhile. You want to add a crunch to your salad, see what kind of nuts you have. Use different vinegars and spices and oils, and all your different condiments add such great flavor too. You can use salsa as a salad dressing, or you can just think about each item and how it will flavor your meal, and then make that decision of if it would be good or bad. Even things like orange juice or citrus to use in marinades, or different fruit juices you can use in marinades or even make salad dressings out of. So take inventory and look at your entire kitchen to see what you can add. And then serve with style. So this doesn't just mean make it look pretty, because we do eat with our eyes and we want it to look pretty, but think about how different toppings on your food and what you plate your food with, how much that impacts the meal. I know some of us always have to have like a dollop of sour cream on our tacos or something like that. And think about how much better a food tastes when you have that extra something on there. So adding some fresh herbs or cilantro or parsley to a soup at the end before you're serving it, or maybe some nuts for some nice texture, things like that. If you always top your sandwich or salad with onions, maybe pickle the onions or just let them soak in some vinegar to bring out a different kind of flavor that that adds a really nice dimension. And then flavor throughout. So taste your food as you're making it, and of course use a clean spoon as you continue to taste it. But start small, and then taste it, and then adjust. So you can always add more, but it's harder to take stuff out. So flavor it throughout, and then just taste and adjust as needed throughout the cooking process.
And I want to make a plug here too, that if you're watching and you feel, I think this is the step where people feel the most overwhelmed, but reach out to your local county extension office, because we have some really nice handouts and resources that really do focus on how to flavor food using different cooking oils and vinegars and herbs and spices. So there's certainly more resources out there that we can provide to you if you need it when it comes to savoring the flavor within these no recipe meals. Okay, so I wanted to touch on several of the questions that we got during our last presentation regarding the dates found on a section of our UK Family Consumer Sciences Extension Facebook page. But I wanted to highlight some of the key takeaways from that in this slide deck for you guys. So this is important to know as you clean out and you restock and you're organizing your pantry and your freezer. So we're not necessarily talking about items needed for baking, because those are more specific and may truly impact the success of your baked goods, but really thinking about what are those dates on that canned good item that's in your pantry. So there's actually no universal food dating system in the United States, which is actually surprising to some. They're actually not required on food labels, and the only exception is for infant formula, where we really are, we really want to ensure that the nutrition and that it is food safe for those most vulnerable little humans. And then really the dates are linked to freshness and quality and not necessarily food safety. So those are just some big things that I think kind of surprise people when they learn that. And so the terms that we most often see is best if used by, or best by, and then sell by. So for best if used by, this indicates the date that the food will retain quality and flavor. So it's simply for freshness, and this is supported by the FDA. So if it's past that date, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's spoiled or unsafe, but it's most likely lost some freshness or some nutritional value. The use by or best by date is usually found on packaged food. So this is what you would see on cereals, snacks, canned goods, frozen entrees as well. You can eat these foods after the date if there's no sign of spoilage, and especially if you have stored, handled, and prepared the food properly, it's most likely still going to be safe after that date. But you really just want to pay attention to see if it smells okay, if it still looks okay, and there's no signs of spoilage. And then the last one that's super common is the sell by date. It's often found on fresh and perishable foods. So this is what you would see on fresh meat or dairy products or breads at the grocery store. Stores usually pull items after this date, but they're actually not legally required to. So again, this kind of goes back to the idea that food is safe to eat after the sell by date if there's no sign of spoilage, or if you've stored, handled, and prepared the item properly. When it comes to fresh meat, fish, and poultry, just be sure to cook that item within 1 or 2 days after you buy it and refrigerate it. And you can also freeze it so it will last longer, because once it's frozen, that date really doesn't matter anymore. And if you do have questions about how food items should be stored for maximum freshness and quality, there's actually an app that was developed by, or can be found on foodsafety.gov. You can download this to either through the Apple Store or the Google Play Store, but it's called Food Keeper. And so really it kind of walks through all different types of foods and gives you tips and suggestions on how to best store and handle those food items. So I encourage you to visit foodsafety.gov or download the Food Keeper app on the Apple or the Google Play Store. And that might be helpful in answering questions.
We have a question about lunch meat. So how long or how do we know that it's safe?
So again, it's going to have that sell by date because that's usually what's found on our fresh meat. So essentially, if there's no signs of spoilage, it should be safe to consume as long as it's been properly stored in the refrigerator. You do want to try to use it within the few days that you purchase it. I wouldn't leave it in there a really long time just so that you don't waste those food dollars. Jeannie, did you have something to add?
I was just going to mention about the Food Keeper app. If you don't feel like downloading the app, you can just, the website has a really easy usable format too. So you don't have to, if you don't have a, if you're not going to download the app, the website allows you to use it in the same way.
We also had a question about frozen food such as chicken. When I thaw it in the refrigerator, how many days will it be safe before cooking it?
I would certainly use it within 1 to 2 days. Within 1 day, most likely, if you have thawed it, go ahead and use that if possible. I'm going to reach out to our specialists for food safety and food preservation and see if there's any additional resources that are out there, especially on some of those items like lunch meat or fresh meat that may be more expensive, just so that we don't waste those food dollars, and see if there's additional resources that she may have. So I'll put that on my list to follow up on. Okay, so we are wrapping up. I know we've gone pretty long here, but I just kind of want to recap these steps that Jeannie walked through with us, because we really want you to feel comfortable and confident in putting together these meals without always having to have a recipe on hand. So starting with a base, picking that form that you're comfortable with or another type of recipe that you can use as a guide, balancing it out and trying to add color and some variety with different food groups from my plate, thinking about how to plan it out. How much time do you have? Is it the weekend and you have some more time, or is it a busy weeknight? And then being creative in how you season it. We want you to enjoy it. We want you to look forward to eating it. So look at your refrigerator door, your spice cabinet, your vinegars, your oils, just to give you some ideas for how to add some flavor to your food. And then I want to share some additional resources that we have. So I showed you that 30 meal idea list, but these are other resources that we will have available for you with a link, or you could reach out to your extension agent for. So maybe you feel like you need a little bit more help. You aren't sure what direction to go. You have these meal plans, but you don't really even know how to stock or put together pantry or kitchen staples. And so we have a new handout where we have broken down some of the most common groupings for kitchen staples that we can provide to you if you really are trying to stock your first kitchen, or you just aren't sure even where to look. Once you have these kitchen staples, really you're going to be able to build pretty much any of the meal ideas that's on the other handout that we already talked about. And then, maybe you just need a little bit more direction. You have all these things in your pantry. So we have a weekly meal plan. So looking at what you have and listing out, looking at what meals you can put together, and go ahead and putting them on your calendar so that you know what you're going to have, eliminating some of that decision fatigue that we have every afternoon around 5 p.m. when we're not sure what we're going to have for dinner. But what's really neat about this weekly meal plan is that it allows you the opportunity to kind of take inventory, right, which was a part of that pantry process. So write out what I have. This is what I need to use. Maybe you've got that leftover brown rice like Jeannie did, or maybe you've got a lot of fresh broccoli that you need to use up that's in your pantry, or in your fridge. So what can you combine with that in your pantry to make a whole meal? And then there's also a portion of this PDF where you can list out what you actually need. So you have this is what I have. Now this is what else I need from the grocery store in order to put together all of these meals, these ideas that were provided in our 30 days of meal ideas. And so these are just the final takeaways that we have as we wrap up. And feel free, if you have any questions at this time, to kind of just throw those into the chat box if you want. But we know this won't happen overnight, and it really does take time and practice. And so that's okay. It's okay to mess up. We're all still learning. And, sometimes it doesn't turn out great. And then sometimes we hit a home run with what we prepare. And just remember that meal ideas are simply based around combining these common ingredients. So in that the list of daily meal ideas, we're just combining them into different forms. So when we say picking a form, that taco, that stir fry, the casserole, we're simplifying the preparation process because it usually means we're just combining these ingredients in some different way with other foods that complement one another. And I think the great thing about this is that cooking is much more flexible than baking. We mentioned that earlier. Baking is very precise, but with cooking, it's okay to be imprecise and, add flavor to your preference, or add in or leave out certain components of your stir fry or burrito bowl that you may like. So just use this as a time to have fun and not worry as much about messing up or following that recipe to a T, which we feel like we have to do. And then just coming back to the idea that, it's simply combining ingredients. A lot of these items can be prepared based on the package directions. So if you can, if you know how to prepare pasta, or if you know how to make rice, then you most likely can put together a pretty comprehensive meal. You may still have concerns about the no recipe meals, but many of the foods we talked about today can be prepared pretty simply. This just provides some guidance because, again, we want to empower you and encourage you to kind of take that next step to explore in the kitchen. And that exploration and experimentation is what really makes this kind of fun. So that's all we have for today. Jeannie, is there anything else that you'd like to add before we open it for questions?
Nothing else other than the questions. So thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you. Mindy, are we seeing any questions? It looks like we're good on Facebook.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any right now. There has been a question about where they can find the meal ideas and the meal planner and the
Yeah.
Perfect. Mindy, if I understand correctly, we're going to be able to include links in the chat boxes for both the Facebook and Zoom so that people can download those.
Yes, those are there. I added them as you were talking about them, and I'm going to add them again in the entire.
Thank you.
So that should be. Also, we can send those out. They've asked for the PowerPoint.
Okay.
And so I said that if they're not signed up for in-service through the PERS registration service, they can send a request to the ukfcsext.uky or at uky.edu, and we can get those sent out to them. And I'll put that in there again as well.
Perfect.
Thanks. I saw a question about frozen milk, and that you can freeze milk for 3 months until it's not going to be good anymore. Mm-hmm. And then there was one about condiments, and that would just depend on which item it is. All of this assuming that it's stored properly, and like there wasn't a power outage or something like that during that time. But that Food Keeper app has like everything you can think of will be listed in there. So I'm pretty sure they have a whole entire section just for condiments. And so depending on what you were looking for, you could just refer to that. And then I saw another question about what to do with herbs that are going to go bad. You could dry them, but what I like to do with ones that I would use in soup, I just freeze them in an ice cube tray with olive oil. Like, so if you just chop them up and put them in an ice cube tray and then cover with a little olive oil, then you can just throw that into a pot for the start of like a base of any soup. And it's really nice because the chopping's already done for you, and a time saver as well.
Great suggestions. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We'll leave the chat box open on Zoom for a little bit so that you can grab those links so you can get the downloads. Thank you for spending time with us. We hope that there was at least some takeaway from today that you can implement and start actually using and moving those pantry staples to the plate. So thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.